what's going on in my life right now, it's important for me to go through that so that I can then create a tributary of pathways for people.
That is Pastor Troy Vaughn, our guest on this week's edition of Conversations from Studio 5. His memoir, From Skid Row to CEO, traces his life from homelessness to executive leadership. It's a story of transformation and second chances. So the last time we spoke, we were on Skid Row.
Yes.
At a music dream you had.
Yes.
that came true. What's life been like in those few years now?
Oh man, life has been so fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I left the mission in February of last year, and which is 2025. The Lord told me my time was up at the mission.
Okay.
And that was like 6 years of president and CEO, 2 years plus on the board. So that's a long stretch.
Mm-hmm.
And plus I was still running my own nonprofit organization, my ministries, my network. And by this time it had grown to massive proportions. And so God told me he needed my voice in different ways. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what that meant at the time.
Yeah.
So I did what I always do, is follow his voice and get quiet.
And what did he say?
And he said, start writing. And my mom used to have this saying. She used to always say, "Write on, write on." And so my wife bought me this T-shirt that said, "Write on." So I got in my prayer closet and I started writing. And I just kept writing. And I ended up with From Skid Row.
From Skid Row to CEO?
CEO.
Wow. What was the process like giving birth to this?
Well, we started out, I have a young lady in my church named Joanne Poplar, and she's in British media. And she's been with me now for like 15 years. And she said the Lord came to her in a dream and told her to help me write my book. And I was like, what? This is crazy. And so he visited her, visited me, and telling me all this stuff. So we started out with a series of interviews, in-depth interviews. And it was very cathartic, really, discovering a lot of things I thought I had buried. And so she interviewed me, she interviewed family members, friends. I mean, it really got deep. And we started with this whole linear process. And then in the midst of that, God breathed in a whole different life where he said I wanted to do it in a more cinematic approach. And then he introduced me to Ava Manuel. And her creative genius gave a different breath to how I could write my story. And then we scrapped what we thought we wanted to do and came into a different vision. And then we came up with this approach in terms of how we wanted to tell the story.
So you said a cinematic approach, so then I have to ask, are we talking movie following this?
Well, we'll see what God says. I think that it lends itself to that. It lends itself to that. The storyline is written in such a way that it creates a divine thread that is a connective tissue to demonstrate how important we are to each other in the human race. And I think that it's starting with the foreword from my mentor, Dr. Lula Balton, who is an extraordinary woman of God, who is well known in the Christian community, especially in community development. She helped found the West Angeles Community Development Corporation. And she does the foreword, and she starts off with, unbeknownst to me, I didn't even lead her into what she was writing. God touched her, and she started talking about the divine thread. And so it was just really this whole tapestry in terms of how we're connected. And it's just this interconnectivity about how we are interdependent on each other. And so I actually wrote 3 books. They'll be released in a sequence.
Okay.
And they're connected to tell an arcing story. One first is my story that leads to the telling of the stories of other people's lives that I've touched. And now we're in the process of interviewing those individuals and to tell their stories. And so it'll be a series of different chapters about this person, that person, and how they've been impacted. And they've been impacted through our ministry. The next book is about our ministries and how we've been able to give birth to things that offer value in community and why that's important. And so the three books together work together as a collection to show the value, one, of one person touching another person's life, but what can be birthed out of that.
One of the things that a reviewer said is that this book is a masterclass in human resilience, divine intervention, and the power of saying yes to purpose.
Yes.
When you hear that, what do you think?
I was like, is that about me? Sometimes when you hear people say those things about your life or something you've written or anything you've done, it really is a testament to God, not so much you, right? Because it really is his handiwork. When we see ourselves as an instrument in the hand of the master, and anything that comes from that has to give him glory. Mm-hmm. And so I'm in awe, really, of everything, every word, everything that was created in there. It came from me and my heart and my soul. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people contributed to it, right? Including my wife, who's a master editor. Mm-hmm. And contributed so much to help me to see myself in different ways. My sisters, my church family, my friend, my circle, Ava, Alan, people at the Tribune who've really contributed so much to giving me free expression, helping me to understand the publishing world. Because one of the things that I prayed about is I wanted to have ownership of my voice. And they came alongside and allowed me to do that because I wanted to make sure that I had an apparatus in place that would be available to help other people share their voices.
Beautiful, beautiful. So people who may not be familiar with your story, you spent time in the Marine Corps, you had a psychotic breakdown, you spent 7 years on Skid Row.
7 years.
7 years.
7 years on Skid Row. Yeah, I had a breakdown. And, in this process opened up so many things for me that I didn't even really realize that was buried. Mm-hmm. So I'm in treatment now. Mm-hmm. Just really some things have been buried, and I started having nightmares through this whole process that resurrected things that I thought I had. And I have been through treatment and recovery and all of that, and been teaching and but doing this interviewing process and asking questions and going really deep, some other things that were, I think, deeply repressed in me started to resurface. So I actually started to investigate really what happened to me when I was in the Marine Corps. And I discovered that I was abandoned by the military. And because what I had was a psychotic break in the services that was treatable. And they literally released me without treatment. And that was one of the things that launched me into self-medication, because I had a diagnosis, but I wasn't being treated for it. And so I didn't know how to have an expression for what I was dealing with. And in my community, Black men don't talk about mental health. And especially during that time, we talk more freely about it now, but back then,
no,
that's not something, it was taboo. So I was self-medicating to deal with the trauma that I was experiencing and the feelings, because no one was teaching me, I had no voice, and I had no one to go to and to turn to. So I actually turned to substance.
Wow. And when you're seeing these things come back, what are you thinking? I thought I conquered, and now what's going through your head?
Well, I think what's going through my head right now is that I have to, one, understand why God is allowing this to happen, wrestle with the strongholds that's happening right now, like the what's going on in my life right now is important for me to go through that so that I can then create a tributary or pathways for people, and then figure out who God wants to align me with so that we can create a collective voice, because I'm not the only one. And for such a time as this, or for whatever reason, God wants to use me. And I think he knows he can, because I'm more like a conduit for his resources. And so I think I've shown that to trustworthy for him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he wants to take me through this trial,
Mm-hmm.
to fight this battle. And so eventually I'll have a lot to say about that.
Love it. I can't wait. Take me back to that moment when you hear the voice of God that begins to turn things around for you. What do you recall about that moment?
Well, audible voice, and I do hear the audible voice of God. And I know a lot of people, they probably cringe when they hear that, but my spirit hears God. And I think when we understand that we are children of God, and God desires for us to hear Him and commune with Him and converse with Him on a regular basis, I think that's an important thing for us to accept and embrace, not be afraid of that. But I think also God revealed Himself to me in stages, in terms of what He wanted me to do, right? And I think that was His grace, because I don't think that I could have handled everything at once. And I think that His grace and His mercy knew that. And so it was a phase approach in terms of what He wanted me to do. And so oftentimes when God speaks to me, it's just like, get here and I'll give you the rest when you get there. Like, it's not all at once for me.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. The book is divided, and I just want to go through some of the areas and get your initial response. Number one, present room.
Yeah. When we thought about how we wanted to approach it, the present room, because it's from Skid Row to CEO, so it's an extrapolation of, let's reverse that. And so I start in my present state as a leader, as a CEO, and how I am dealing with what God has instructed me to deal with in my present capacity. And it's in that capacity, in terms of how I'm leading, that allows me then to move into different areas. And then is what allows me to start thinking backwards.
Past survival.
Yes. And that's that past survival moment, right? And in that present room I'm in, there's a trigger that sends me to a past survival. And then I invite the audience or the reader into that past survival with me. And that's when they get to experience me, whether I was homeless, in my addiction, or incarceration, or whatever that past survival moment that triggered that. That's when they get to experience me in that state.
Spiritual encounter.
Yes. And that's when God intervenes. And what I want the reader to experience is that, God is not the respecter of person, but God's intervention in my life in that moment is something that is not just a wake-up call, but it's a divine intervention, right? To move me into a place of both divine appointment, because God knows the expected end, but there's an encounter in how God has strategically placed people in our life. Sometimes we are aware of it and sometimes we're not. And you'll be able to see that in the story throughout the chapters, that there's people that He's placed in my life, even in the midst of that moment where God interrupted. I didn't know it, but God was there.
Nice. Silver thread.
That's when it's all woven together. That connectivity, right? How we are divinely connected, and really beginning to understand how everything is interwoven together, connected. This divine thread is important for us, and it's important for me. I believe important for God to communicate to the world for such a time as this, that we are greater together. When there's so much rhetoric out there trying to divide us, God wanted me to put something in the space to unite us.
Last, room for assignment.
And that's where all the readers are invited to do the work. And this is very much a workbook too, and inviting people to do the work over and over again at their own pace, and to self-discover who they are in the story and where they are in their own space.
Why this type of book to make people or push people to do the work to bring themselves?
Because, everybody has a skid row, and, everybody has a space where they have a place where they're encountering God, and they need to be able to see that. And God is just using my story as a backdrop, right? To help them to be able to experience that and to see that. And I think this book is needed now. God called me out of one scenario into this space because he had need of me. And my story is not unique in the sense that there's many people who've been homeless before, many people that have been out of Skid Row and overcome life, but my voice is needed. And the way God has used it and is using my whole arc and my whole life story is needed now to tell the story so that other people can see their life as a mirror through it. And I think this book is a reflection of that.
Love that. Spend much time on Skid Row these days?
I do. I sit on the board of several different nonprofit organizations. I'm a board emeritus still of the LA Mission. I give to a lot of the nonprofits there. I serve on the board as an executive leader for LA Christian Health Clinics. It's my passion. I'm always going to serve.
Nice. What's next?
We are building multi-prongs through our ministry. Christ in the Ministries is our baby. My wife and I, we started it in 1998. And it is very much thriving. We have 420 employees. And we're getting ready to launch a 50-bed, state-of-the-art rehab facility in the city of Hawthorne. And that will allow us to really create, multi-services for individuals who are dealing with substance abuse issues and mental health issues. We already have 4 permanent supportive housing facilities. We have 24 interim housing facilities. We have youth programs. Our LARP network has over 650 agencies under it and member organizations. We are doing state and national work from policy to change policy around criminal justice reform and everything that intersects from housing to education to employment to healthcare. So, I tend to do everything that God would have me to do. Writing, I want to do, I'm working on, obviously, I told you my other 3 books, but I want to start a children's book too. My father was a genius. He died with a needle. I tell people all the time he died with a needle a needle in his arm in a porta potty in Inglewood, but he was a genius and who just went the wrong way. So I'm resurrecting some of the things that he did when he started his first black greeting card business. And he created a character called Randy the Red Ant. And right now I'm working with some cartoonists and some illustrators to resurrect that character, to tell my life story through a children's arc. And it's an 8-volume book called Randy's Road to Redemption.
Oh, I love it.
In a children's story format. And with just pictures and cartoons and just like that. So I want to, have a children's line. There's a lot of things I want to do.
I see. I'm
just, I'm a creative, but I really want to let my life be a full expression of what God could do through one life, but let that life touch so many different people.
I love it. Troy Vaughn's memoir, From Skid Row to CEO, is available wherever you purchase your reading material. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's edition of Conversations from Studio 5. We truly appreciate you making this your weekly destination for uplifting interviews with a strong focus on faith. For more information on Studio 5, be sure to check out our YouTube page. You can do that simply by searching Studio 5 with Efrem Graham. I look forward to seeing you next week right here on the podcast.